Hello, friends. Welcome back to Feni for the Soul. So, today I'm going to bring you face to face with a very interesting person, Professor Frank Conlon. Now, Professor Frank Conlon is American and is Professor Emeritus of South Asian Studies, History and Religion at the University of Washington in Seattle. He's an octogenarian and in the 1960s, as a young professor, he had come down to India and had researched my community, the Chitrapur Saraswats. We are just 23,000 of us. And he wrote a stellar book called Caste in a Changing World. So, without much ado, just sit back and enjoy this interview. Great. So, very happy to, talk to you, Frank. I read your book and a whole lot of people have read your book. But, I'm so happy that you've given us this time. So I'm really going to kick off with, I wanted to ask you, I heard from some people, our seniors in our community, that you had begun research on the Dawoodi Bohra community in Mumbai, and then you lost all your manuscripts in Bombay somewhere, and then you have to start from scratch. Is that true, that story?
Well, the loss of notes is true. I was not actually studying the Boras. My original dissertation topic had been a study of how the British law courts, the legal system, had impacted a number of communities in Western India. Possibly the Boras would have fit in. This had been stimulated by something that I had done on my master's studies, master's degree studies, which was a study of the Khojas or Ismailis, the Aga Khan folks. But when I got to Bombay, I was actually, my net was cast much wider. Now, when fate intervened and my briefcase with most of my notes got pinched, I was, in a sense, looking for a new subject or looking for a way of completing my doctoral studies. And a friend of mine from the University of Chicago, a woman named Maureen Patterson, who had in her own studies worked extensively on the Chitpavan, Kokonasta community, had sort of made a suggestion, it might be interesting to study Saraswats. Now, I think at that point, it was just the idea of possibly the entire GSB complex of communities. And she took me out to the Popular Book Depot and introduced me to Sadanand Bhatkal, who actually put me in touch with the Kannada Saraswat Association, and that's where my research began. They also put me in touch with the late Gopal Hattiangdi, who had a lot of materials that I could employ in my research. And through him, I began to make connections from place to place and was able to complete the research. So it wasn't. I'm afraid the Boras never got they never got a moment in. They were just one of my potential topics before I changed into the study of the Bhanaps.
No, it's quite fascinating because your book, yeah, this is how the book cover by that Manohar Publications, which is available on Amazon.
Yes,
Cast in a Changing World,
yes.
by you. And I wanted to tell the audience how this book is almost 50 years old now because 1975 publication, the first time.
Uh, seven, 77, I think it was.
Yeah, 77.
I
I
think it
think
was
I read something
77.
1975, University of California.
Right.
Yeah. So,
It was actually there was a very small Indian edition published by what was then called the Thompson Press in Delhi.
yeah.
But it was like 700 copies, and it went out of print almost immediately. Now, I don't want to take anything away from my dear friends at Manohar,
Mm.
but thanks to the efforts of folks the Chitrapur ebooks.
Hmm.
The, the manuscript is also available online.
Online. I agree.
Yeah.
And a whole lot of people are reading it online. Yeah, my question, Frank, is, popularly it's known that the Saraswat Brahmins came from northern India, and whether it was Kashmir or Haryana, the point is that they went all over the country, but one big numbers came to Gomantak or Aparant, which
Yes.
is today's Goa. So your take on
Uh,
that, what does your research tell you? What did your research tell you?
well, I'm sorry to disappoint you about that. When I saw the question, I regretted that I really do not have any research on when I say the prehistory of the community
Yeah,
uh, prior to the beginnings on the west coast of India. Clearly, they came from somewhere in the north.
yeah,
They were associated with the Gauda branch of Brahmins. They weren't Dravida Brahmins, uh, but how they got there and whatnot. I mean,
yeah.
I know stories, but I never was able to do any research that established something that I could say is my contribution. I just don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
No worries.
it's,
Good to know this. The other question, Frank, is, because your research really is 1700 to 1935, this is the period you have researched.
hmm.
So, I wanted to ask you, was it the forced conversions by the Portuguese in Goa, or the discrimination that really led a lot of the Saraswat Brahmins of Goa to migrate to what we know as Karnataka today?
Well, when I was doing my studies in Bombay in the 1960s, I had a number of occasions to talk to the late Professor A.K. Priolkar, who wrote a book on the Goa Inquisition, and he was quite keen on the thesis that everybody who left Goa had left under the threat of persecution. But subsequent research on the economic history of Goa suggests to me that Saraswats, not just Chitrapur, but I mean the Saraswat diaspora, if you will, had moved down the coast in pursuit of economic opportunity even before the Portuguese arrived. And some research, which is not mine, but others, seem to suggest that these families of Brahmins were actually quite deeply involved in trade, and this would be sort of the ancestors of what sometimes are referred to in the South as the Konkani Brahmins, the GSBs. Um, Others would have possibly gone simply for the fact that there were opportunities. Certainly, some of the ancestors of the Banap community clearly had gone to find employment under the Nayaks of Ikeri or Bednur, and it seems to me that it's probably a combination. Clearly, uh, there was persecution, and people did move. We know. I mean, we moved people. The temples were moved from the old territories in Goa into what were at that point non-Portuguese territory across the river. The late mathematician polymath D.D. Kosambi, with whom I talked back in 1966, just before he died, made the point that families in his particular lineage had clearly split up. Some converting to Christianity in order to hold on to their lands in the old territories, and others moving across with the temples into the other territory. In other words, the Portuguese effects weren't as, I mean, the territory in which the persecution occurred was mostly you might say, the core of Goa, of what today's Goa, and a lot of people had moved outside that area and then had, in a sense, moved on. Borders and boundaries were a little bit more fluid in those days than they are today. So, yes, it had some role, but I don't think it was the exclusive role. I think that, in fact, people moved simply seeing economic opportunity.
Yeah. That's a good point, yeah, because I was also reading stuff that told me, a lot was because of economics. Yeah. So there's Frank. I wanted to ask you. See, many of our ancestors who went from Goa to Karnataka, they dropped their Goan surnames and adopted the names of the villages where they lived in. Like I am a Chandavar, so the Chandavar village is next to
Yeah,
Kumta, and then there are Kumtas and
yeah,
Benegals and Padukons and Murdeshwars. So
right.
that spoke a lot, and they learned Kannada double quick. So that spoke a lot about the adaptability of our community. What's your take on that? Because you've interviewed so many Saraswats.
Right. Well, there's several points that in your question that could be teased out a bit. Uh, for one thing, uh, most of the records that are preserved of the British colonial, after the British came, for many years, the name structures of that were used in the records of North and South Kannada districts were basically Southern. In other words, the place name simply would be the beginning of things, and it might just simply be an initial, and you might have B. Rama Rao or B. Shiva Rao. We know it's now Benegal Shiva Rao. And the style that I found in records in communications, particularly within the old Madras presidency, was that the Saraswats had, in a sense, adapted to that style of speech. When they began moving to Bombay and began to find opportunities in Bombay, you began to see a change in which people were changing their names. They weren't changing their name; they were switching the way in which their name was developed. In other words, you would have been maybe C. Rahul rather than Rahul Chandarakar. And I mean, I just noticed this as I went through the records of the late 19th century. You began to see a change. Now, the thing is that, as you know pretty well, the Saraswats are Konkani speakers. And outside of Goa, Konkani is not a majority language anywhere. The result has been a what I it's interesting. Some people in the community said that they thought that it was a pity to be a minority language and whatnot. My response to that was, on the other hand, it's been a great advantage. Your ancestors had to learn Kannada or Tulu, or even if you went farther south, Malayalam. And this created a kind of linguistic advantage. It's not. I don't think it's cited in my book, but there was an article I read once by a woman whose ancestors were Bonnets, talking about Sundays at their house. I think they were in Mangalore, and the uncles and the cousins would sit around after a meal and have conversations in which they would try to pun in perhaps 5 or 6 languages: Tamil, Kannada, Konkani, Tulu, Hindi if they knew it. And the point is I think that people who have to have multiple language skills, in a sense, simply have other skills of adaptation that are much to their advantage. They may not seem so. I'm sure it doesn't always seem so that way, but it makes a difference.
Yes, yes.
And I think that is why people, in a sense, prospered when they moved farther south.
Absolutely. Spot on, spot on. That's right. So, Frank, like I mentioned before we began talking, that you were very privileged to meet the Matadipatis, or the spiritual gurus of the community. Three of them actually. So starting with the senior most of the three, Swami Anandashram. Now, I'm keen to get an anecdote of all the three, Swamijis from you. If you remember, yeah, it'll be nice.
Well, well, the thing is, I mean, the circumstances in which I met the three Swamijis were quite different.
Mm,
Uh, the the first was came in 1965,
mm,
very closely before Swami Ananda Swami's Mahasamadhi.
mm,
He was an elderly man. Uh, I was visiting Bangalore, and I believe it was K. Guru Dutt who took me over to the Bangalore Mutt, which in those days was a much more modest affair than it is today. And I had an audience with the Swami. Uh, I have to tell you that there was nothing he said that I can remember, other than he asked questions about what I was studying, and I was given to given to feel that he had, you might say, given me his blessings. But I actually recall writing up a small memoir of that meeting that was published in the Sunbeam. Well, I suppose at the end of 1966. So would it have been 60? Maybe it must have been 66. I said 65. It must have been 1966. And just, I say, he had a presence that simply was unique. It is. I've never been in the presence of someone that had the same, you might say, mental or emotional impact on a visit in which there was not a lot. There was not a lot of exchange. I was asked questions about my research. I talked about my research, but it was just he was. Well, he was something. I still remember that afternoon.
wonderful.
Now, in the case of, in the case of Paradnanashram Swamiji, my relations were entirely different. Uh, my first encounter with him was he had come to Bombay and was staying at the home of Gopal Hathiangadi on the Laburnum Road, and uh, it was sort of suggested that if he could practice speaking some English with me, and he he had a he was shy about that, perhaps naturally. And the interesting thing was he did not ask me about spiritual matters or anything to suggest a spiritual thing. He wanted to know what I had heard about uh, Sputnik and scientific advances. I, my last meeting with him was actually on my second visit to India in 1971, and at that point he was staying out in Khar in Bombay suburbs, and I still have a picture that I took with him uh, up on the terrace of the house where he was staying, and he was very pleased to show me his ham radio because he was very keen on his amateur radio, long
That's right.
shortwave broadcast.
That's right.
And again, I mean, I think it reflected. I mean, the fact. He was born, just in the vicinity of Santa Cruz Airport. He had not grown up in the sort of rustic setting of a place like Chitrapur or Chandauar or any of those other Kannada towns. And so his mind incorporated some things that were perhaps they didn't assist him in his role as a Swami, but he was clearly he had a very broad interest.
Yeah.
Now, when we come to Sadhya Jog Shankarashramji, uh, my meetings with him were just very interesting exchanges of some ideas. Uh, the last time I saw him was in 2011, which was my last visit to India, when I was invited to give a keynote address at the Comparative Saraswat Association centenary celebrations, and I was on the stage with Swamiji, and he presented me with a shawl and a coconut. Unfortunately, because of American regulations, I couldn't bring the coconut home, but I still have the shawl. I do remember one thing, though. In maybe 2005 or 2007, I spent some time at the Mutt. And one evening, he invited me to join him, and we drove out. He drove me out to a little hamlet a little bit east of Chitrapur. It may be part of it. I mean, I don't know if it's physically considered part of Chitrapur, but there was a thing. And he brought some sweets to the local children who were gathered around him, and he seemed very, very happy to have that, happy to have those young people in his presence. But of course, I haven't seen him since.
Yeah.
But it's very clear. It's very clear from everything that I've read and seen. Just simply to think back to how things were, say, 50 years ago, how his leadership has enlarged the significance of the Mutt and the community within the community and its institutions. I cannot. I don't have the photos to document it, but surely, I mean, the area around the Mutt in the 1960s was really pretty rustic, very. And when I went back in 2007, I just was quite amazed at all of the changes that had taken place.
That's right. It's like a urban large village now, urban village. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
So this collage of Chitrapur Saraswat achievers,
Oh,
a whole lot of them.
Nilakani Rao.
Yeah, a whole lot of them. The late Sham Benigal was my maternal uncle, my mother's older brother, who passed
I,
on recently.
yeah,
Yeah. So and then
right.
the rest of them are all there, clockwise. Nandan Nilekani, Prakash Padukone, his daughter Deepika, then Anand Nag, the actor, and then ending with Leena Chandavarkar on the extreme left. So this is just
Oh, yeah.
six of the so many achievers. What do you think makes we're just 23,000 people, but the ratio of achievers is very, very high. What is your take on that, Frank?
Well, I think it probably has to, in some degree, it has to do with the expectations of the parents. It's simply there's well, I'll tell you, when I met Nandan Nilekani in Bangalore in 2007 out at the Infosys office, he proposed that the Saraswats have enjoyed an excess of what he called social capital. And that what he meant was that there are institutions have been built up over the years, family connections, community connections, that have emphasized education, support for education, emphasized opportunities for advancement. And because of not having in a sense of having to escape the old occupational pattern of being what they used to call in the 19th century quill drivers, that is clerks, which was what a lot of Bahama sisters were doing, moved to example. It simply has created a stimulus to excel in various conditions. Now, don't forget, Rahul, there are some Bahams who haven't done well at all in the world. Not, and it's we appreciate the achievements of the glittering elite who have done these things. But what I find interesting is I think even at less exalted levels where maybe people haven't become famous, you have the same tendency to try to promote learning, uh, a drive for success in whatever endeavor one might have. I mean, I was thinking back how I was quite surprised uh, to meet some young men. This is back in the 1960s, whose occupations were not elite, but they clearly were very good at what they did.
Mm. Wonderful, wonderful. You know, if you mentioned northern Karnataka, and you said that probably
Oh,
one of the prettiest parts of India that you have seen. And I have a visual for that. Um, yeah, this one. So there's just some parts of northern Karnataka which are so pretty. Hampi and those temple towns, Badami, just as an example. And you said that. So why do you think so?
well, what I mean, when I was referring to that, it was primarily thinking about North Kannada district,
Okay.
and particularly, I have to say, particularly before the building of the Konkani Railroad, things have changed there a lot. But I have a mental picture that I remember. I was traveling on an overnight bus from Bangalore to Bhatkal with Jayant Rao, the husband of the singer Lalit Rao.
Mm.
They had been my hosts in Bangalore, and I remember in the morning, early morning, as the dawn was coming up, we were coming down the Ghat, and there was some haze and some fog, and all these beautiful green trees and the red soil and the light. It was simply something that I can imagine would have always been in the back of the people's minds of the Saraswats who moved as young people to places like Bombay when
Yeah.
they were in a completely different urban setting.
Yeah.
It was a very idyllic place. Of course, it was also an area. It was also a place where they didn't have many opportunities. This is at
True.
least in the 19th century,
True.
and so they had to go somewhere else. But there's something about your home district that makes a
Yeah.
difference.
Absolutely. Finally, Frank, my last question really is how much Konkani did you pick up, and do you remember any of that now?
I picked up some at the time, and, I'm afraid all I remember now is Niue.
Huh? What is that? Sorry?
I don't really have say why.
Why?
Yes, yes, no.
That is yes, yes. So you
All
remember
right.
why? Not bad, not bad.
Well, I'd say I would say Niue, isn't it? But I think people were very tolerant of me. I had uh, the advantage of perhaps being a I think anything I said would be sort of a surprise, and it's just. In fact, at one time I heard somebody said to me in English, he said, "I thought I heard you speaking just now. I didn't know better. I would think it was Konkani." And, well, it was Konkani, but it was my Konkani.
You were very grateful to the cooperation. You mentioned the cooperation of the community in your research. Can you tell us?
Right. I I just have to say that uh, I suppose you might say it had to do with a certain uh, amount of confidence, or dare I say pride in the traditions of the Banap community, that when a foreigner, stranger, you might say, knocked on their door and said, I'd like to ask you some questions about your heritage or your activities. I'm not sure if an Indian scholar were to come knocking on the door of an average American household, that they'd get as warm a welcome as I got there in my research. I, of course, people helped me. I mean, I was passed from one family to another. My first visit to the Mutt involved first visiting, actually staying with the Mariman family in Hubli, and then I took a bus over to Karwar, and then down to Ankola, and I stayed in Kumta. Now, again, this was 1966. Kumta in those days was a pretty quiet place, and I think things have definitely ginned up since then. But I just remember time and again being welcomed, and fed, and supported in ways that it's hard to even put it in words how grateful I am for that experience.
Wonderful. Wonderful, Frank. So lovely talking to you. So I'm sure the people in our community and otherwise also, people who watch this video story will find it very interesting. So stay well. We'll keep in touch.
Well, thank you very much. As I say, you have to recognize that every day that you have, particularly when you get to be my age, every day is a gift. And I should just mention something, that there was a very famous, very rich American who made a fortune in publications, named Walter Annenberg, and I think his his career had nothing to do with India, but I'm always reminded that he would say, when asked, "How are you, sir?" or "How are things going, sir?" his answer was hopeful and grateful. Hopeful and grateful.
Wow.
And that's a very good sentiment to maintain, particularly in what we now clearly see is evidence of this being the Kali Yuga.
True, true, true. Anyway, thank you so much. Thank you so much. So Melia.
Thank
Huh?
you. Thank you indeed.
So Melia. Bye. Bye.
Ram Ram.
Bye. Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.